Good morning. You're joining us live here on India Today's social media handles. I'm Akshita Nandagopal, and over the next few minutes, I'll be rounding up all the top stories that we're tracking this morning. What's made headlines since yesterday is an incident that was reported in Haryana of a DSP, Surinder Singh, being mowed down by a dumper truck when he went to conduct a raid and to stop the sand mining mafia. And unfortunately, we've seen several such stories of the mafia running rampant with zero fear of law and order, with zero fear of the uniform as well. Now, what's horrifying is that this incident that's happened in Haryana's New was reported yesterday. We told you about this yesterday, and today there's been another incident, this time in Ranchi. Let me focus on Haryana first, and then I'll tell you about this Ranchi incident as well. So essentially, this DSP was at the venue. This was in New, where he was to take on the sand mining mafia. He was going to raid them, and at that point, suddenly, this dumper truck ran over him and killed him. This is an officer who was very upright, was taking on the mafia, which clearly even the government doesn't dare to, and it's led to endless outrage about why the sand mining mafia isn't something that they've cracked down on. The accused has been taken into custody here. The police immediately cracked the whip, but it's heartbreaking to imagine what the family must be going through, because this officer was to retire in a matter of months. We're being told in about 4 months or so he was due to retire, was doing his job, was doing an honest job, and paid the price for it. There's endless questions being asked right now of the government and the need to clearly crack down on this kind of mafia. You know, in so many places you see the sand mining mafia, all of them essentially calling the shots in their areas. Nobody can dare to question them, and if someone does, they meet this kind of a fate, that of Surinder Singh. We've seen these kind of incidents being reported in a course of many years before as well, of anyone, even someone, an officer, someone in the uniform daring to take on the mafia, paying with their lives. Let me tell you about what's happened in Ranchi. Here it wasn't really the mafia. What we're picking up is that this woman officer, an SI in the Ranchi police, this happened on the outskirts of Ranchi. The cops got a tip off about a cattle smuggler, and that's something that's very rampant in Jharkhand. This officer was there to try and stop them. The cattle smuggler, seeing her in uniform, used his van to run her over and then tried to flee. He was taken into custody, but obviously there's a lot of shock. Again, it brings it down to the same point, that there's no fear of law and order, there's no fear of the uniform. So it's extremely concerning right now. You know, when we broke the story this morning, I had a conversation with Jharkhand BJP also, who said that this is the reality of Jharkhand, that cattle smugglers are now calling the shot. They're rampant. This kind of smuggling keeps happening despite it being illegal, and there's no way of checking it, because even if the cops get some sort of a tip-off about cattle smuggling happening and they try to take them on, look at how one SI had to unfortunately pay with her life. And this is a story that's essentially become national headlines, the biggest talking point today that you need to know about. The other stories also are with regards to Parliament. Third day of the monsoon session. As we speak, I know that there is a lot of chaos that's happening in both houses, so much so that the Rajya Sabha has already been adjourned. The Lok Sabha, I think, is still functioning, but you know, the moot point here is that the opposition is raising issues like inflation, the hike in GST rates, and they're refusing to let the House function. It's become so bad that there's no way that the Lok Sabha Speaker or the Rajya Sabha Chairman has any control over what's happening right now in the Parliament. Rajya Sabha has already been adjourned, and remember that you have Parliament, essentially the session kicking off at 11, so it's barely lasted even 15 minutes. You had MPs rushing into the well of the House, raising slogans, holding up placards, posters. It's become the norm essentially to ensure the Parliament doesn't function. The government stated that they have about 32 bills that they want to bring in the monsoon session. It's a 24-day session, 2 days gone. The third day is also looks like going to be completely washed out with zero business happening. You had, interestingly, Smriti Irani early this morning holding a news briefing where she pinned the blame directly on Rahul Gandhi, saying he is on purpose stalling business in the House, that he doesn't want any progress in this Parliament session, so is personally ensuring that he disrupts the House. Remember, yesterday Rahul Gandhi had led the protest outside Parliament at the Gandhi statue over these issues of inflation, surging prices, how the rupee also value has fallen, and also with regards to the hike in GST raids. That's something, of course, everyone's been questioning why the opposition is up in arms over, because the decision was taken at the GST Council, where there are representatives from different political parties, essentially from different state governments. So we will be tracking what happens in Parliament and ask that all important question of how long this kind of disrupt politics will continue, because no matter what we're seeing in Parliament is minimum business. It's all about making the right noise and making all the right headlines, and in the process of that you're seeing no reform in Parliament, despite that being the basis on which the monsoon session or any session of Parliament must be conducted. The big international story of the day is about what's happening in Sri Lanka. We've been seeing for the last many weeks, I'm sure you've seen the ground reports that we've also been reporting here on India Today about the kind of protests, the agitations by civilians. It all comes down to today, because today there will be elections held to choose the next president of Sri Lanka. And I'll just run you through who are the contenders. One is Ranil Wickremesinghe, the current Prime Minister, the current acting president as well of Sri Lanka. The others who are in the running is Dalas Alahaperuma as well as Anurakumara Dissanayake. You've got these two leaders also in the running currently. And how will this voting happen? It's essentially Parliament that will choose who the next president will be. And it's historic, because if you look at what's happening in Sri Lanka, this is the first time in 44 years that the Sri Lankan Parliament will be coming together to decide the next president. It's a triangular contest after Gotabaya Rajapaksa fled from Sri Lanka and then submitted his resignation. Remember that Wickremesinghe is currently the acting president, but even over that there's endless ruckus, because several civilians have said that they don't want the regime as it was to continue. They want him also removed, but he's someone with a lot of experience, a 6-time prime minister, now the acting president also, and he's faced, of course, a lot of protests because his office also was breached by these protesters. As far as the protesters and the civilians are concerned, who are they picking? They are for Alahaperuma, which is why you had Sajith Premadasa also backing out of the race and going public with his support for Alahaperuma. Mostly the protesters seem to be on board with him, but whoever it is, it will come down to the fact that they have a mammoth task ahead of dealing with, in fact, the economic crisis that Sri Lanka is in, and all of the anger that the political leadership is currently facing. It isn't just limited to the Rajapaksas, but largely of political leaders, and the fact that they did nothing to stop Sri Lanka from reaching this kind of a crisis, of an economic crisis. So the political crisis may be dying down. The economic crisis is something that will take months at least to fix in Sri Lanka. We're going to be tracking very closely what is the result of the election in the Parliament for the next president of Sri Lanka. That and many more stories you can track live here on India Today's social media handles. That's it from me.